In 605 AD, the first year of the Day era of the Sui dynasty, the morning mist over Chang'an had not yet fully dispersed, when, in the government offices outside the Forbidden City, an examination that would change the course of Chinese civilization was quietly being prepared. No one could have foreseen that this seemingly ordinary spring morning would mark the beginning of an entirely new era in Chinese history. Emperor Yang of Sui, Yang Guang. This ambitious monarch, in the second year after his ascension to the throne, made a far-reaching decision to formally establish the Jinshi examination. This decision was like a stone cast into the river of history, creating ripples that would continue for over 1,300 years, not finally subsiding until the 31st year of the Guangxu reign in the Qing dynasty. On that spring afternoon, sunlight filtered through the carved lattice windows, spilling into the spacious main hall of the Ministry of Personnel. Dozens of scholars from various regions sat upright and proper, with pristine examination papers placed before them and freshly sharpened brushes in their hands. The air was filled with a faint fragrance of ink, occasionally broken by the soft sound of sleeves brushing against paper. These young faces were filled with tension and anticipation, for they knew this examination would determine their fate and usher in an entirely new system for selecting officials. In the earliest years of the imperial examination system, everything appeared so simple and unadorned. There were no dedicated examination halls, no strictly partitioned cells, and certainly none of the complex regulations that would come later. Examinations were held in the main halls of various government offices, with candidates sitting together as if attending an elegant gathering of literati. In the early Tang dynasty, this tradition of borrowing government offices for examinations continued. Whenever the examination season arrived, officials from the Ministry of Personnel would rearrange their office desks to make room for the incoming candidates. Those halls that usually handled government affairs instantly transformed into examination venues that determined the fates of scholars. The government office notices hanging on the walls were temporarily taken down, replaced by examination rules and requirements. In Chang'an during spring, willow catkins danced in the air and peach blossoms bloomed. Candidates gathered from all directions. Some came from the prosperous lands of Jiangnan, others from small frontier towns in the northern borderlands. Different accents mingled in the streets and alleys of Chang'an. Different dreams collided in this ancient capital. They stayed in humble inns, waking up early every morning to tidy their attire, walking toward the examination venue with anxious hearts. The examinations back then were more like scholarly exchanges among literati. There was no strict proctoring system, no anti-cheating measures. Everything relied on the candidate's self-discipline and moral character. The examiners set up simple seats on one side of the hall, sipping tea while observing the candidate's performance. Occasionally, an examiner would walk over to a candidate and quietly ask if they needed more ink or paper. Time flowed by quietly like water, and in the blink of an eye, it was already the Kaiyuan era of Emperor Xuanzong of Tang. This monarch, later known as Ming Huang by posterity, not only created the glorious Kaiyuan prosperity, but also made important contributions to the development of the imperial examination system. The 24th year of Kaiyuan, 736 AD, a milestone year in the history of Chinese education. This year, Emperor Xuanzong issued an edict to transfer the supervising department of the imperial examinations from the Ministry of Personnel to the Ministry of Rites, and at the same time first established the examination hall. This decision seemed simple, but its significance was profound. It marked the elevation of the imperial examination from a simple means of selecting officials to an important component of the national ritual system. The Ministry of Rites, this important department in charge of national ceremonies, education, and imperial examinations, from then on became a sacred place in the hearts of countless scholars. Whenever the spring breeze turned Chang'an City green, candidates from all corners of the land would gather in front of the Ministry of Rites gates. With devout hearts like pilgrims, they waited to enter this hall of knowledge. Although called the examination hall at this time still had no dedicated building. It was more like a concept, a symbol representing the nation's emphasis on talent. During examinations, officials from the Ministry of Rites would temporarily set up the examination venue, arranging tables and chairs in the spacious main hall of the Department of State Affairs, creating a relatively quiet examination environment for the candidates. Those temporarily constructed examination halls, though simple, were filled with a solemn atmosphere. Red curtains separated the examination hall from the outside world, and golden screens bore the words "fair and upright." The examinees took their seats in order according to the stroke count of their surnames, each with a small desk before them upon which were placed the 4 treasures of the study and pristine examination papers. In that distant era, Chang'an was not only the political center, but also a sacred place of culture. Countless young people with dreams of learning came from all over, seeking opportunities to change their fate in this prosperous capital. In the early morning of Chang'an City, thin mist shrouded the towering city walls. Distant mountains appeared like dark eyebrows, and nearby waters were like mirrors. The examinees rose early, finished washing up in the small courtyards of their inns, then hurried to the examination halls. The sound of their footsteps echoed on the bluestone roads, interweaving with the sounds of early rising merchants and craftsmen in the city, composing a vivid picture of urban life. The examinations of that time were relatively relaxed in terms of time, allowing examinees to think and answer at their leisure. Without strict time limits, without a tense proctoring atmosphere, everything seemed so natural and harmonious. Examinees could stand up and move around between answering questions, could ask the examiners about difficult problems, and could even exchange insights with fellow students sitting nearby. This relaxed examination environment cultivated many outstanding talents. They were not only well learned, but more importantly, possessed the ability to think independently and a spirit of innovation. It was in such an environment that the Tang Dynasty produced countless literary giants, politicians, and thinkers whose works and ideas still influence us today. In the budding period of the imperial examination system, we can see a simple and sincere humanistic care. The examinations of that time were not merely tests of knowledge, but comprehensive assessments of character and virtue. The examiners not only looked at how well the candidates wrote their essays, but also observed their conduct and temperament. During the examination, if a candidate felt unwell, the examiner would show concern and even allow them to temporarily leave the examination hall to rest. If a candidate lacked writing brushes, ink, paper, or inkstones, due to poverty, the examination hall would provide them for free. This humanized management approach reflected that era's respect for knowledge and talent. In the evening of Chang'an City, lanterns were just lit, with lights glowing in countless homes. Those scholars taking the examination gathered in the inn's main hall, sitting around the warm fireplace, sharing their learning experiences and life insights with each other. They came from different places with different backgrounds, but all harbored the same dream, to find their own place in this great era through their own efforts and talents. Looking back at that distant era, we can't help but be moved by the wisdom and foresight of those ancient sages. Over 1,000 years ago, they already recognized that a nation's prosperity requires not only strong military power, but also outstanding talents and advanced systems. The establishment of the imperial examination system provided scholars from humble backgrounds with opportunities to change their fate, and also selected a large number of excellent talents for the nation. The imperial examination system of the Sui and Tang dynasties, though still quite rudimentary, embodied the principles of fairness, justice, and openness that became the foundation for all selection systems in later generations. Those scholars writing furiously in crude examination halls contributed indelibly to the development of Chinese civilization with their sweat and wisdom. When night falls, when the wheel of history slowly turns, those stories about the early days of the imperial examination, like stars twinkling in the night sky, forever illuminate the path forward for future generations. In that era full of hope and dreams, every scholar who took the examination was a witness to history, and every examination was a driving force for the progress of civilization. Time flies, years pass like a song. From Emperor Yang of Sui's bold innovation to Emperor Xuanzong of Tang's institutional refinement, the imperial examination system slowly grew during this budding period, like tender sprouts in spring. Though young, full of boundless vitality and hope, this system would continue to develop and improve over the next 1,000 years, becoming one of the most important institutional innovations in the history of Chinese civilization. Time slowly flowed to the Song dynasty, that golden age when literature emerged in great numbers. Outside the city of Kefeng, an unprecedented building was quietly being constructed. Craftsmen sweated profusely under the autumn sun, for they were building China's first dedicated examination hall in history, a place born entirely for the imperial examinations. No longer borrowed government office halls, no longer temporarily erected tents. This examination hall had high surrounding walls, a solemn gatehouse, and most importantly, hundreds of neatly arranged small rooms. Looking down from above, These densely packed small rooms were like a honeycomb, each cell destined to carry the dreams of a scholar. The autumn breeze gently brushed over the newly completed examination hall, bringing the fragrance of osmanthus and the coolness of distant mountains. Those students who would soon face their destiny's test here did not yet know what kind of experience awaited them. Walking into the examination hall, the most eye-catching were those small rooms called examination cells. Each cell was only 1.3 square meters, roughly equivalent to the size of a modern double bed. 3 brick walls, one side open, 3 chi wide, 4 chi deep. This was the entire space where a candidate would spend 3 days and 3 nights. The design of the examination cells was actually quite clever. There were 2 brick grooves on the wall where wooden boards could be placed. During the day, the lower board served as a chair and the upper one as a desk. At night, both boards were placed on the lower level, forming a simple bed. In this way, all the needs for sitting, writing, and sleeping were met in this tiny space. Though simple, every examinee had the same conditions, whether you were the son of a wealthy merchant or a farmer's child. Whether you came from the bustling capital city or a remote mountain village, everyone was equal here. Each person had the same amount of space, the same desk and chair, the same opportunity. The imperial examinations of the Song dynasty were held once every 3 years, which meant these examination cells were empty most of the time. After the exams ended, all doors and windows would be sealed, and the entire examination compound would fall into a long slumber. Over the 3 years, spring rain would dampen the walls, summer sun would crack the wooden boards, autumn wind would blow off roof tiles, and winter snow would pile up in corners. Spiders would spin webs in the empty rooms, mice would scurry through the darkness, and moss would quietly grow in the damp corners. When the next examination came around, and the administrators opened those long sealed cells, the sight before them was often heartbreaking. Roofs leaked, walls peeled, floors were waterlogged, and traces of time were everywhere. Some cells were so badly damaged they couldn't even provide basic shelter from wind and rain. Faced with such conditions, the examinees could only rely on themselves. Before each examination began, they had to first play the role of cleaners and repairmen. Some brought brooms and rags, carefully cleaning every corner. Some brought hammers and nails, repairing loose wooden boards. Others brought oiled paper and cloth to cover the leaking spots. In that era, without property management, everything had to be done with one's own hands. This spirit of self-reliance was actually a test in itself. Being able to stay calm in harsh conditions, being able to not give up in the face of difficulties, these were the very qualities needed to become a qualified official. Pu Songling, a Qing dynasty writer, once described the examinees in the examination compound like this: feet sticking out from every room, heads poking through every hole, like cold bees at autumn's end. This metaphor is truly vivid. Imagine a late autumn dusk, the sun setting in the west, with examinees buried in their studies in hundreds of examination cells. Because the rooms were so small, everyone had to sit hunched over. From a distance, each room showed a head and a pair of feet sticking out, indeed like bees in a hive, and the chill of late autumn made these bees look especially desolate, like cold bees about to endure winter. This metaphor is not only vivid, but also speaks to the hardships of the imperial examination. Those scholars with dreams in their hearts endured both physical and mental trials in cramped spaces, persevering for the dreams in their hearts. The time spent in the examination cells was unforgettable for every candidate. During the day, they pondered and answered questions in the tiny space. At night, they tossed and turned on the crude wooden plank beds. Moonlight spilled in through the open doorway, leaving dappled shadows on the ground. The night breeze carried the distant sound of bells and the night watchman's wooden clapper, along with the soft coughs and rustling of other candidates turning in their sleep. On nights like these, everyone was alone, yet not truly alone, because all around were hundreds and thousands of others, just like themselves, striving for the same dream. Some candidates would rise in the dead of night and walk to the doorway to gaze up at the starry sky. In that era without electric lights, the night sky was exceptionally bright, with stars twinkling brilliantly. Looking at these eternal stars, they might have contemplated their own insignificance, or perhaps their own greatness. Although conditions in the examination cells were harsh, this design embodied a rare spirit of equality. The 1.3 square meter space, though cramped, ensured that every candidate had their own independent space for thinking. The uniform standards meant that regardless of wealth or status, everyone faced the same challenges and received the same treatment. This equality was the most precious value of the imperial examination system. It gave every talented person the opportunity to change their fate, regardless of birth, judging only by ability. In those honeycomb-like little rooms, countless talents were born, who later became officials, scholars, and poets, making contributions to the nation and society. When the autumn wind blows again, when the exam season arrives once more, those stories about the Song Dynasty examination halls continue to circulate. Those students who struggled in the tiny examination cells wrote an important page in the history of Chinese education with their perseverance and effort. Though their figures have disappeared into the long river of history, their spirit forever inspires future generations. As time flowed into the Ming and Qing dynasties, the imperial examination system had developed to its peak. The examination halls of this era were no longer the relatively simple structures of the Song dynasty, but had transformed into massive, well-equipped examination fortresses. The most famous Zhengnan examination hall in Nanjing covered over 300,000 square meters, had more than 20,000 examination cells, and could accommodate over 20,000 candidates taking exams simultaneously. This was a true examination empire. Whenever the provincial examinations began, the entire examination hall operated like a precision machine. Tens of thousands of candidates gathered from all directions, with examination officials, service staff, doctors, cooks, and guards all performing their respective duties. This wasn't just an exam, but more like a large-scale social mobilization. The autumn sunlight fell upon the tall walls of the examination hall, and those students about to enter the examination grounds formed a long line outside the gate. Their faces were filled with nervousness and anticipation, their hands tightly gripping their admission tickets, their hearts silently reciting the poetry and classics they had studied hard for years. At this moment, they were about to step onto the most important battlefield of their lives. The provincial examinations during the Ming and Qing dynasties adopted a 9 days and 6 nights examination format, which was one of the most grueling tests in Chinese examination history. The entire examination was divided into 3 sessions, each lasting 3 days with 1 day of rest in between. Including the time for entering and exiting, candidates actually had to spend 9 days and 6 nights in the examination compound. The first session tested essays on the 4 books and regulated verse poetry, the second session tested classical interpretations, and the third session tested policy essays. Each session was a comprehensive test of the candidates' knowledge reserves, literary foundation, and thinking abilities. More importantly, it was also an extreme challenge to their physical fitness and psychological endurance. Imagine what it felt like to spend 6 consecutive nights in that cramped examination cell. No comfortable bed, no tasty meals, no family companionship, only cold brick walls and crude wooden boards. In the dead of night, the entire examination compound had only the sound of wind and occasional coughing. That kind of loneliness was enough to break those with weak willpower. Before entering the examination compound, every candidate had to undergo a thorough body search. The strictness of this inspection would seem almost unbelievable by today's standards. Candidates had to remove all their clothes, even underwear was not spared. Inspectors would carefully examine every piece of clothing to ensure no written materials were smuggled in. Shoes had to be taken apart for inspection. Hats had to be turned inside out. Even hair had to be carefully felt through to prevent anyone from hiding small notes in their hair buns. Food also had to undergo strict inspection. Pastries brought by examinees had to be broken open. Fruits had to be cut open for checking, and even eggs had to be cracked to confirm there was no writing inside. Some examinees would bring cured meat and dry rations to prevent food from spoiling, and these also had to be checked one by one to ensure nothing was carved on them. The most impressive was the inspection of stationery. Brushes had to be taken apart to see if paper slips were hidden inside the brush handles. Inkstones had to be turned over to check the bottom, and even ink sticks had to be carefully examined for abnormalities. Some clever cheaters would carve tiny characters on ink sticks, and inspectors had to use magnifying glasses to discover them. After passing the strict inspection, examinees could finally enter their own examination cells. By this time, the cell design had greatly improved compared to the Song dynasty, but the basic layout remained unchanged. 1.3 square meters of space, 2 wooden boards, and a few brick crevices. Surviving 9 days and 6 nights in such an environment required great wisdom and skill. Experienced examinees would bring various practical small items. A soft cushion to lay on the wooden board, making sleep less hard. A small pillow or clothes rolled into a pillow to ensure the neck wouldn't be too uncomfortable. A thin blanket, as late autumn nights were still quite cold. The arrangement of food was also quite particular. Examinees usually brought some non-perishable dry provisions, flatbreads, steamed buns, pickled vegetables, cured meat, eggs, and so on. These foods needed to provide sufficient nutrition while being easy to store and eat. Some examinees would also bring some brown sugar or honey to replenish their energy when fatigued. Most important was water during the 9 days and 6 nights. Adequate drinking water was a basic necessity for survival. Examinees usually brought several water flasks filled with clean water. But what to do when the water ran out? The examination compound had designated water supply points, but queuing for water wasted time and drained energy. Although the daytime exams were stressful, at least there was something to do. The real test came at night. When the sun set and the entire examination compound fell into darkness, that sense of loneliness and fear would instantly overwhelm you. Without electric lights, one could only rely on dim oil lamps or candles for illumination. But fuel was limited, and it was impossible to keep them lit all night. Most of the time, the examination cells were pitch black. In such darkness, every tiny sound would be amplified, coughing from afar, the sound of the examinee next door turning over, mice rustling in the corners, the night wind rattling the roof tiles. Some examinees would feel fear in the dead of night. Various ghost stories circulated in the examination compound, saying that some examinees had died in the cells due to excessive pressure, their souls lingering and often appearing at night. Although these were all superstitions in that environment, any slight disturbance could make one's heart race with terror. More examinees were troubled by homesickness. Away from home for months or even years, at this critical moment they would think of their parents, wives, and children at home, and remember the mountains, rivers, and fields of their hometown. Some couldn't help but shed tears, some would silently pray in their hearts, and others would grit their teeth and tell themselves they must persevere. The 9-day, 6-night examination was an extreme test of the body, and illness or even death occurred from time to time. The examination compound was equipped with dedicated doctors, but in that era of limited medical conditions, many diseases were incurable. The most common was catching cold and fever. The weather in late autumn was unpredictable. It might still be warm during the day, but would become bitterly cold at night. In the cramped and damp cells, it was easy to catch cold and fall ill. Once fever set in without modern medicine, one could only tough it out and continue the examination. Diarrhea was also a common problem. The food hygiene conditions in the examination compound were limited, and the food brought by examinees was prone to spoilage, making gastrointestinal diseases easy to spread. Some examinees became dehydrated from severe diarrhea and ultimately had to give up the examination. The most worrying thing is mental illness, immense pressure, harsh environment, prolonged loneliness. These factors combined can easily lead to mental breakdowns. Some examinees would experience hallucinations, some would become abnormally excited or abnormally depressed, and others would completely lose their minds. After each examination ended, there would always be some examinees found in the examination compound who could never walk out again. Some died from illness, others committed suicide due to mental breakdowns. These tragedies reminded people that the imperial examination was not only a competition of knowledge, but also a test of life itself. Despite the harsh environment and fierce competition, the brilliance of human nature could often be seen in the examination compound. Although the examinees were competitors, they would help each other when facing difficulties. When an examinee fell ill, neighbors would share their medicine. When someone's food went bad, others would voluntarily share their dry rations. When someone felt afraid at night, surrounding examinees would softly comfort them. This camaraderie forged through hardship was often deeper than any friendship. Among the examination officials, there were also many kind-hearted people. They would show concern for the examinee's physical condition during their rounds, would promptly arrange medical treatment when they found someone sick, and would offer comfort when an examinee had an emotional breakdown. Although the system was harsh, the people enforcing it were often full of human warmth. The 9 days and 6 nights finally came to an end. When the bell for the final examination rang, when the gates of the examination compound reopened, those examinees who walked out were like people returning from another world. Their faces were pale, their bodies weak, their clothes wrinkled, their beards scruffy, yet a special light shone in their eyes. It was the strength that came from enduring the ultimate test, the relief of completing an important life mission, and the hopeful anticipation for the future. Some would burst into tears the moment they walked out of the examination hall. An eruption of emotions suppressed for 9 days and 6 nights. Some would howl toward the sky, a cry of longing for freedom and a declaration of victory. Others would silently walk toward home, with only one thought in mind: it is finally over. Regardless of the outcome, they had all completed a transformation in their lives. In those cramped examination cells, through those 9 days and 6 nights of torment, they had tested not only their knowledge but also their willpower, character, and humanity. This experience would stay with them for life, becoming their most precious treasure. On that autumn night in the 7th year of Tianxun 1463, it should have been a moment of complete silence. In the Jiangnan examination hall in Nanjing, thousands of candidates were buried in their papers in their respective cells, candlelight flickering like beams, swaying unsteadily in the late autumn night wind. No one could have predicted that a disaster about to change countless fates was quietly approaching. The fire initially started as just a wisp of smoke, rising from a single examination cell in the northeast corner of the Imperial Examination Hall. Perhaps a candidate's oil lamp had tipped over, perhaps a candle had ignited some papers, or perhaps an exhausted candidate had knocked over a fire source while dozing off. In an era without modern firefighting equipment, even the tiniest spark could lead to a massive disaster. The autumn wind fueled the flames. Dry timber, flammable paper, densely packed buildings, all became the perfect fuel for the fire demon. The flames spread from one examination cell to another, from one row of buildings to the next. The orange glow illuminated the entire night sky as thick smoke billowed upward, blotting out the heavens. When the fire broke out, the candidates inside the examination hall faced a cruel reality. They were trapped in a massive cage. To prevent cheating and maintain order during the examination, the gates of the hall were locked tight, surrounded by high walls and heavily guarded. These measures, originally meant to ensure fairness, had now become deadly traps. The fire spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Those candidates still buried in their papers initially only caught a whiff of smoke, assuming it was just a neighbor's oil lamp smoking. But when they looked up, they saw flames already raging in the distance, with thick smoke billowing everywhere. Panic spread instantly, faster even than the flames themselves. Fire, fire, panicked shouts echoed throughout the examination compound. Candidates rushed out of their cells one after another, but soon found themselves trapped in a hopeless situation. The gates leading outside were locked tight, and the guards were at a loss in the chaos. Thousands of people were trapped in this massive courtyard, like caged beasts, helplessly watching the flames inch closer and closer. Some candidates tried to climb over the high walls to escape, but those walls were over 3 meters tall, with sharp tiles on top. In the darkness and panic, many fell from the walls, breaking their legs. Unable to move anymore, some tried to build ladders with tables and chairs, but the wooden furniture was quickly consumed by the flames. In this disaster, the complex facets of human nature were fully revealed. Some candidates displayed admirable courage and selflessness in the face of danger, helping elderly and frail companions, supporting the injured to find safe places, and even risking their lives to rescue strangers. A candidate from Suzhou named Zhang Wenhua, upon discovering that an elderly candidate in the neighboring cell couldn't escape due to his bad legs, didn't hesitate to carry this complete stranger on his back. Through the thick smoke and flames he moved step by step towards safety, eventually rescuing the old man, but collapsed himself from inhaling too much smoke. But there were also some who lost their minds in extreme panic. They shoved others aside, trying to secure a chance to escape for themselves. They trampled over fallen companions, just to run a little faster. At the brink of life and death, the usual refinement and gentleness were cast aside, leaving only the most primal survival instincts. The most heartbreaking were those young examinees. Many of them were not yet 20, in the most beautiful years of their lives. They came to the examination hall with hearts full of ideals and ambitions, hoping to change their own and their family's fate through this exam. But now, they had to face a test of life and death, a cruel reality they had never imagined. The guards of the examination hall also found themselves in an unprecedented dilemma. According to regulations during the examination period, no one was allowed to open the gates of the examination hall at will. This was an ironclad rule to maintain the fairness of the exam. But now, thousands of lives hung by a thread, and if the doors weren't opened immediately, the consequences would be unthinkable. The captain of the guards was an old soldier named Li Shaozheng. He had worked at the examination hall for over 20 years and had seen countless exams, but had never encountered a situation like this. As the fire grew larger and the cries for help from the examinees became more and more desperate, his heart was in fierce turmoil. Open the doors and he might be accused of disrupting the examination order. Don't open them, and these young lives might perish in the flames. In the end, humanity triumphed over the system. Li Shouzheng ordered all the gates to be opened, letting the examinees escape. But by this time the fire had already spread severely. Thick smoke filled the air, and visibility was extremely low. Many examinees lost their way in the chaos. Some ran toward the wrong exits. Some were trampled in the crowded masses and never got back up. The guards also joined the rescue efforts. They rushed into the fire, searching for examinees still trapped in the examination cells. They maintained order at the gates to prevent more serious stampedes. They covered their mouths and noses with wet cloths, charging into the thick smoke again and again to save people. These guards, usually stern and rigid, displayed admirable courage and responsibility at this critical moment. When the fire was finally extinguished, when the thick smoke gradually dispersed, when the first rays of morning light shone into the examination compound, what lay before people's eyes was a field of ruins. The once neatly arranged examination cells had become charred, crumbling walls. The once scholarly examination grounds had become a desolate wasteland covered in ashes. Even more heartbreaking were those young lives that could never walk out of the examination compound again. According to historical records, this fire caused the deaths of 91 examinees, with hundreds more injured. Among the deceased were white-haired elderly examinees who had been taking the exam for decades, and this was supposed to be their last chance. There were brilliant young talents in the prime of their lives, full of learning with promising futures ahead, and there were some teenagers who had just come of age, who hadn't even truly begun their lives yet. When clearing the scene, people discovered many touching details. Some examinees, in their final moments, were still tightly clutching their exam papers, as if they were the most precious things in the world. Some had written farewell messages to their families before death, the handwriting messy but full of genuine emotion. Others were supporting each other, not giving up their care for companions even in the face of death. This disaster shocked the entire court and society. People called this fire the tomb of the nation's finest talents, because those who perished were outstanding individuals from all regions, the hope of the country and the nation. Their deaths were not only personal and family tragedies, but also a tremendous loss for the entire society. The Great Fire of the 7th year of Tianshun became an important turning point in the history of the imperial examination system. This disaster exposed serious problems in the construction and management of examination halls, and also triggered deep reflection on examination safety throughout the court and society. First was the issue of building materials. Traditional examination halls mostly used wooden structures, which had relatively low construction costs, but extremely poor fire resistance. Once a fire broke out, it could easily spread over large areas. After this disaster, the court began considering using brick and stone structures to build examination halls, though more expensive. The safety was greatly improved. Second was the lack of firefighting facilities. In that era, people's awareness of fire prevention was still very weak, and there was almost no firefighting equipment in the examination halls. There were no fire extinguishing tools, no emergency exits, and no dedicated firefighting personnel. After this disaster, the court began requiring examination halls everywhere to be equipped with necessary firefighting facilities and to develop detailed fire emergency plans. The most important was the reform of the management system. Although overly strict closed management could prevent cheating, it also increased safety risks. After this disaster, the court began to seek a better balance between examination security and cheating prevention, ensuring both the fairness of examinations and the personal safety of examinees. The Great Fire of the 7th year of Tianshun left a deep mark in the history of Chinese education. Whenever later generations mention this disaster, they feel deep sorrow and reflection. Those 91 young lives, those unfulfilled dreams, those shattered families, all became eternal pain in the long river of history. But this disaster also revealed the most brilliant side of human nature. At the moment of life and death, those examinees who sacrificed themselves to save others, those guards who stuck to their duties, those officials who risked their lives in rescue, their actions demonstrated what true courage and responsibility mean. Their spirit embodies the excellent character of the Chinese nation better than any essay could. This fire also became a catalyst for reforms in later generations. It was precisely because of such a painful lesson that later examination halls paid more attention to safety, and examination management became more humane. In a sense, the sacrifice of those who perished was not in vain. They exchanged their lives for institutional progress and the safety of future generations. On those quiet nights when moonlight spills into the rebuilt examination compound, people seem to still hear the calls of those young lives. They remind future generations that no system should come at the cost of human lives, and no goal should neglect care for people. This is the most profound lesson history gives us, and the most precious legacy left to us by those departed talents. The embers of the Great Fire in the 7th year of Tianshan had not yet fully cooled when the horn of reconstruction already sounded. On that charred ruins, a quiet revolution was brewing. This was not merely simple reconstruction, but a profound reflection and comprehensive reform. The spring breeze blew across the ruins of Jiangnan examination compound, bringing not only the hope of new greenery, but also the breath of institutional reform. In the first year of Chenghua, 1465, when the newly appointed Minister of Works Baigui received the imperial edict to rebuild Jiangnan examination compound, he knew this was no ordinary construction project. On his desk lay the detailed investigation report of that fire, every page soaked with blood and tears, every number representing a living life. 91 young souls were reminding him that this reconstruction must completely change the practices of the past. Baigui was a meticulous and far-sighted official. He personally visited the survivors of the fire, listening to their recollections and suggestions. He gathered the finest craftsmen and architects to repeatedly discuss the design plans for the new examination hall. He even sent people to various places to inspect the construction of other examination halls, drawing from all available experience. During those long nights, he often sat alone under the lamp studying blueprints, contemplating how to maximize the safety of examinees while maintaining examination order. The most important change came from the choice of building materials. Traditional wooden structures, though quick to build and lower in cost, had fatal flaws in fire prevention. Baigui decided to adopt an entirely new construction method, a hybrid structure with brick and stone as the main body supplemented by wood. This decision caused quite a controversy at the time. Conservative officials believed that brick and stone buildings were too costly and would place a heavy burden on the treasury. Some craftsmen also worried that brick and stone structures were more difficult to construct and would greatly extend the construction period. But Baigui stood firm in his position. He knew well that no amount of money could buy back those lost lives, and no construction period was more important than the safety of the examinees. The new construction plan was carefully designed. The walls of the examination cells were built with blue bricks, with thickness doubled compared to before, not only greatly improving fire resistance, but also providing better soundproofing. Although the roof still used wooden structure, it underwent special fireproofing treatment, and fire barriers were installed at key locations. The floor was paved with bluestone slabs, both aesthetically pleasing and practical, and even if a fire occurred, it wouldn't fuel the flames. The most ingenious design was the improvement of the ventilation system. Between each row of examination cells in the new examination hall, wider gaps were left, not only facilitating evacuation, but also promoting air circulation. At the top of each examination cell, openable skylights were installed, which could provide natural lighting and also serve as escape routes in emergencies. These seemingly simple improvements actually reflected a profound understanding of human-centered design. Besides the improvements in building structure, the new examination hall also saw significant enhancements in humanistic care. The most obvious change was the expansion of the examination cell space. The original cells were only 4 chi-square, and candidates could barely stretch their bodies inside, making the long examinations unbearably painful. The new cells were increased to 6 chi-square, and although it seemed like only an addition of 2 chi, it brought a qualitative improvement to the candidates' comfort. More importantly, the new examination hall began to pay attention to the basic living needs of the examinees. At both ends of each row of examination cells, public tea and water supply points were set up, where examinees could access hot water at any time for making tea or washing. In the 4 corners of the examination hall, more hygienic and private toilets were built, no longer crude pit latrines, but proper facilities with partitions and drainage. The lighting system was also improved. In addition to traditional oil lamps and candles, the new examination hall also set up large lanterns along the main passages, ensuring that even at night, examinees could walk safely within the examination hall. These lanterns used specially made lamp oil, which not only provided higher brightness and longer burning time, but was also relatively safer. The Great Fire of the 7th year of Tianshun also prompted the court to re-examine the arrangement of examination times. Traditional imperial examinations often lasted 3 days and 3 nights, and examinees had to answer continuously in cramped examination cells, exhausted both physically and mentally. This high-intensity examination not only affected the examinee's performance, but also increased safety hazards. Exhausted examinees were more likely to make operational mistakes, such as knocking over oil lamps or candles. Starting from the Chenghua era, the court made humanized adjustments to the examination schedule. First, rest time was increased after each day's examination ended. There were designated rest periods during which examinees could take short naps in their cells to recover their strength. Second, nighttime management was improved. Examinees were no longer required to continue answering questions late into the night, but were allowed to arrange their rest schedule reasonably according to their own conditions. The most important change was the introduction of the humanitarian clause. If examinees experienced physical discomfort or other emergencies during the examination, they could apply to temporarily leave their cells to receive treatment, then continue the exam after treatment was completed. This seemingly simple regulation actually reflected the importance placed on examinees' lives and health, and also prevented accidents caused by physical conditions. The most important improvement in the new examination compound was the establishment of a complete fire prevention system. This was an entirely new concept at the time, as traditional Chinese architecture rarely considered dedicated fire prevention facilities. But the tragic lesson of the 7th year of Tianshan made people realize that fire prevention couldn't rely solely on luck and prayer. There had to be scientific prevention and response measures. First was the configuration of fire prevention facilities. In every corner of the examination compound, large water vats were set up, filled with clean water year-round, ready for immediate use in case of fire. Along the main passages, specialized firefighting tools were placed, including buckets, sand, wet blankets, and so on. These tools were maintained by dedicated personnel to ensure they could function properly at critical moments. More importantly, a professional firefighting team was established. The examination compound was equipped with dedicated firefighting personnel who were not only responsible for daily fire prevention patrols, but also for organizing rescue operations when fires occurred. These firefighters all received specialized training, were familiar with the compound's layout, mastered basic firefighting skills, and could respond rapidly in emergency situations. The most innovative aspect was the design of the emergency evacuation system. The new examination compound was equipped with multiple emergency exits that were normally kept closed, but could be quickly opened in emergencies. Each exit had dedicated signage, and examinees were informed of these exit locations upon entry. Additionally, detailed evacuation plans were developed, specifying which exits examinees from different areas should use to evacuate, and how to avoid crowding and stampedes. Beyond improvements to physical facilities, the new examination compound also introduced many innovations in management systems. Most importantly, an examinee safety record system was established. Upon entry, each examinee had to fill out detailed personal information, including health conditions and emergency contacts. This information not only helped contact family members in emergencies, but also enabled administrators to better care for examinees with special needs. The proctoring system also became more humanized. Traditional proctors often maintained a stern attitude and kept their distance from examinees, with their main duty being to prevent cheating. The new proctoring system required proctors not only to maintain examination order, but also to pay attention to examinees' physical conditions and mental states. If an examinee showed any abnormal signs, they were to promptly provide assistance or report to superiors. The most revolutionary change was the introduction of an examinee feedback mechanism. After each examination, opinions and suggestions from examinees regarding the compound's facilities and management were collected. These opinions were carefully studied, and reasonable suggestions would be adopted in the next examination. This practice was very forward-thinking for its time, reflecting respect for the examinee's central role. In the spring of the 3rd year of Chenghua 1467, the rebuilt Jiangnan Yongyan welcomed its first imperial examination. When thousands of examinees walked into the new examination hall, they saw a completely new world. Spacious and bright examination cells, clean and hygienic environment, complete supporting facilities, everything was refreshingly new. More importantly, the examinees felt an unprecedented sense of humanistic care. No longer cold regulations and strict management, but warm service and thoughtful attention. When they drank hot tea at the tea supply stations, when they stretched their bodies in the spacious examination cells, when they saw the bright lights along the corridors, what welled up in their hearts was not only gratitude, but also hope for the future. This examination was very successful. Not only did no safety incidents occur, but the examinees generally performed better than before. Many examinees expressed after the examination that the good environment and humane management allowed them to better focus on answering questions and demonstrate their true abilities. This proved the correctness of the reforms and provided valuable experience for the renovation of examination halls in other regions. The successful renovation of Jiangnan Gongyuan quickly attracted nationwide attention. Officials from various places came to visit and learn, hoping to apply these advanced experiences to the examination halls under their jurisdiction. The court also promptly summarized the renovation experience of Jiangnan Gongyuan and issued the standards for examination hall construction, requiring examination halls across the country to be renovated or rebuilt according to the new standards. But the promotion process wasn't smooth sailing. Some local officials, out of cost considerations, dealt with the renovation work passively, only doing superficial work. There were also some places bound by traditional concepts, believing that paying too much attention to examinees' comfort would affect the seriousness of the examination. Facing these obstacles, the court adopted various measures, including both policy guidance and institutional constraints, to ensure the reforms could truly be implemented. The most effective way of promotion was setting up model examples. The court selected several representative examination halls for key renovations, then organized officials from other regions to come and observe and learn. When they saw the effects of the renovations with their own eyes and heard the examinees' praise with their own ears, their original doubts and resistance quickly disappeared. By the Hongzhi era, most examination halls across the country had completed renovations, and the new construction standards and management systems had been fully promoted. This not only greatly improved the safety of the imperial examinations, but also improved the examinees' testing experience, creating favorable conditions for selecting more outstanding talents. From the Great Fire in the 7th year of Tianshun to the comprehensive reforms during the Chenghua era, this process embodied the progress of institutional civilization in ancient China. This progress was not a sudden revolution, but gradual improvement, not external pressure, but internal reflection. Not simple patching, but systematic innovation. Most importantly, this reform reflected the emphasis on human life and dignity. In traditional concepts, the system was often regarded as sacred and inviolable, and individuals had to unconditionally obey the requirements of the system. But the fire in the 7th year of Tianshun made people realize that no system should come at the cost of human lives, and no goal should ignore care for people. This awakening of humanistic spirit was not only reflected in the renovation of the examination hall, but also influenced institutional construction in other aspects. From then on, when formulating various policies and systems, more consideration would be given to the impact on ordinary people, and more attention would be paid to people's basic needs and rights. This was an important progress in ancient Chinese political civilization. When we look back at this period of history, we cannot help but be moved by the wisdom and courage of the ancients. In that era lacking modern technological means, they used simple materials and basic tools to create a relatively complete safety protection system. More importantly, they used an open mindset and the courage to reform to promote institutional progress and the development of civilization, like spring breeze turning into rain, nourishing things silently. These seemingly minor improvements actually embodied profound humanistic care and institutional wisdom. They were as warm as spring breeze, as nourishing as fine rain, quietly changing the face of the imperial examination system, and quietly changing the fate of countless examinees. In those rebuilt examination halls, when night fell and all was quiet, moonlight streamed through the skylights onto the blue brick floor, making everything appear so peaceful and serene. Those souls who once struggled in the flames might perhaps feel comforted, for their sacrifices were not in vain. The lessons bought with their lives had transformed into institutional progress and blessings for future generations. This is the power of history and the hope of civilization. Every disaster may become an opportunity for progress, and every reflection may bring about institutional improvement. In this sense, those young lives lost in the Great Fire of the 7th year of Tianshun, though their deaths are deeply regrettable, their spirit forever inspires future generations, pushing the wheels of history ever forward. When the first rays of morning light pierced through the thin mist, spilling onto those ancient streets and alleys, the entire capital city was awaiting the arrival of a sacred moment. This was the day of posting results, the crucial turning point in the fates of countless scholars. Outside the high walls of the examination hall, in those familiar hutongs, in every corner, there pervaded an indescribable tension and anticipation. Those examinees who had endured 3 days and 3 nights of grueling tests were now waiting with anxious hearts for fate's verdict. Some paced back and forth at home, some prayed devoutly in temples, while others had arrived early at the posting location, hoping to learn the results at the first possible moment. This waiting was painful, yet also sweet, for it carried so many hopes and dreams. When the list was finally posted, the entire scene instantly erupted. Those densely packed names, those neat, regular script characters, appeared especially solemn and sacred under the morning light. The crowd surged toward the list like a tide, everyone anxiously searching for their own name, searching for that symbol that might change their fate for life. I passed. When a candidate found his name on the list, his shout pierced the morning tranquility. This voice contained so many emotions, the relief of years of hard study finally paying off, the longing for a beautiful future life, the response to family expectations, and even more, the affirmation of his own perseverance. This kind of joy was contagious. Soon, cheers rose one after another in front of the list. Those newly successful candidates whose names appeared on the golden list. Some were so moved that tears filled their eyes, some were so excited they danced with joy, while others stood frozen in place, as if they still couldn't believe this dream had come true. Their family and friends also rushed over to congratulate them, and the entire scene became an ocean of joy. The most touching were those older candidates. Some of them had been taking the exam for over a decade, or even several decades, experiencing countless failures and setbacks, but never giving up on the dream in their hearts. When they finally saw their names on the list, that excitement and emotion was beyond words. The years had carved deep marks on their faces, but at this moment their eyes sparkled with the light of youth. Passing the imperial examination is just the beginning. The true glory lies in returning home in triumph. When the newly appointed scholars set off on their journey home, their feelings were complex and excited. Those roads they had walked countless times now looked different. The flowers and grass by the roadside seemed more vibrant. The clouds in the sky seemed more brilliant, and even the air seemed to carry a sweet fragrance. The people of their hometown had already received the news. They spontaneously organized themselves to welcome this hero who had brought honor to their hometown. A decorated archway was set up at the village entrance, red carpets were laid on the streets, and the drum and gong troupe beat out a joyful rhythm. When the figure of the newly appointed scholar appeared at the village entrance, the entire village erupted. The sounds of firecrackers, drums and gongs and cheers merged together, as if to spread this joy throughout the world. The most touching moment was the reunion with family, when the newly appointed scholar knelt before their parents and told them, "Your child has not let you down." Finally passing the imperial examination, those white-haired elders would often weep tears of joy. They remembered their child's cleverness in youth, remembered the years of hardship supporting their studies, remembered countless nights of worry and anticipation. Now, all their sacrifices had been rewarded, and all their dreams had become reality. Passing the imperial examination wasn't just an honor, it was a major turning point in life. From then on, the newly appointed scholars' status underwent a fundamental change. They were no longer ordinary commoners, but intellectuals recognized by the state, an elite class qualified to participate in national governance. This transformation in identity brought not only an elevation in social standing, but a complete change in life's trajectory. In traditional Chinese society, those who excel in learning should become officials was a widely accepted path in life. Passing the imperial examination meant one could enter officialdom and realize the ideal of cultivating oneself, managing the family, governing the state, and bringing peace to the world. This was the only chance to change their family's fate. When one person attains enlightenment, even their chickens and dogs ascend to heaven. Though this saying is somewhat exaggerated, it truly reflects the significance of examination success for an entire clan. More importantly, passing the imperial examination brought spiritual fulfillment and a sense of achievement. Years of hard study had finally paid off. Years of perseverance had finally shown results. This sense of accomplishment couldn't be replaced by any material wealth. It gave people the motivation and confidence to keep moving forward. Many newly appointed scholars, when recalling the moment they passed the examination, would say it was the most wonderful time of their lives. However, passing the imperial examination wasn't the end, but a new beginning. For the newly appointed scholars, the real test had just begun. They needed to adapt to their new identity, take on new responsibilities, and face new challenges. Transforming from a scholar buried in books to an official governing the nation. This process wasn't easy. First is the psychological adaptation. For years, their lives have centered around studying and taking exams, and now they suddenly have to face complex social realities and handle various practical problems, which requires an adjustment period. Some people can quickly adapt to their new roles and thrive in officialdom like fish in water. Others can never adapt and eventually choose to retire or pursue other careers. Second is the challenge of capability. The imperial examination mainly tests literary talent and theoretical knowledge, but actual administrative work requires practical abilities and skills in handling complex problems. This capability transition doesn't happen naturally and requires continuous learning and improvement through practice. Many newly successful candidates feel overwhelmed when first entering officialdom and need a period of tempering before they can competently perform their duties. Passing the imperial examination brings not only glory but also responsibility. The newly successful candidates know well that their success belongs not only to themselves, but also to their families, their hometowns, and their country. They carry the expectations of their families, bear the hopes of their fellow villagers, and shoulder the important trust of the nation. This sense of responsibility often accompanies them throughout their lives, becoming the guiding principle of their conduct and the source of their motivation. In traditional Confucian culture, when successful, benefit the whole world is the ideal of every scholar. Passing the imperial examination provides them with the opportunity and platform to realize this ideal. Many newly successful candidates are full of passion, hoping to contribute their strength to the prosperity and strength of the nation. Many of them indeed achieve this, becoming famous politicians, thinkers, and literary figures in history, but responsibility also means constraints. As the elite class of society, every word and action of the newly appointed jurin would be watched and scrutinized by society. They had to constantly mind their conduct, maintain their reputation, and avoid any behavior that might tarnish their image. This constraint was sometimes heavy, but it was precisely this constraint that ensured the character and quality of the entire scholar official class. While we immerse ourselves in the joy of seeing our names on the golden list, we must not forget those candidates who failed. They too had endured years of hard study, carried the expectations of their families, and harbored dreams of changing their fate. But fate did not favor them. Before the announcement board, when they discovered their names were absent, the disappointment and pain were unimaginable. This contrast is cruel, but it is also reality. Although the imperial examination system provided a path of advancement for commoners' children, this path was narrow and the competition was fierce. Behind every successful person there were countless failures. This phenomenon of thousands of soldiers crossing a single log bridge reflected both the fairness of the imperial examination system and exposed its limitations. For those candidates who failed, failure did not mean the end of life. Many would choose to keep trying and prepare for the next examination. Some would turn to other professions and apply their talents in different fields. Others would choose to teach and pass on their knowledge to the next generation. Although they did not obtain official titles, their lives were equally valuable and equally worthy of respect. The joy of passing the imperial examination shows us the bright side of the civil service examination system. It indeed provided a stage for many talented people to showcase themselves and supplied society with a large number of capable individuals. Those who stood out through the imperial examinations often had solid cultural foundations and high moral cultivation, playing important roles in their respective positions. But we also can't ignore the dark side of this system. Overly intense competition often distorts people's psychology and produces various negative social phenomena. Some people would do anything to pass the exam, even breaking laws and regulations. Some became cynical due to long-term failure, developing resentment towards society, and others became bookworms who could only take exams because they focused too much on examinations while neglecting development in other areas. More importantly, although the imperial examination system was theoretically fair, it was often influenced by various factors in practice. Family background, economic conditions, regional differences, and other factors all affected examination results. Candidates from wealthy families could often receive better education and access more resources, making success easier for them, while candidates from poor backgrounds, despite working equally hard, often faced more difficulties and challenges. As times changed, the imperial examination system also continuously evolved and adjusted, from initially emphasizing literary talent to later focusing on practical knowledge, from simple examination selection to comprehensive ability evaluation. This system kept trying to adapt to the needs of the times. However, as history entered the modern era, the imperial examination system faced increasingly greater challenges. The impact of Western civilization made the traditional education system seem increasingly outdated. Those Juran and Jinshi who were well versed in the 4 books and 5 classics often found themselves inadequate when facing Western science, technology, and political systems. The rise of modern schools and the development of overseas education both posed challenges to the traditional imperial examination system. More and more people began to question whether this system that had lasted for over 1,000 years still had any reason to exist. Against this backdrop, even those newly successful examination candidates who had their names on the golden list began to feel lost and confused. They discovered that the knowledge they had learned seemed increasingly outdated in the new era, and their abilities seemed increasingly insufficient in the face of new challenges. This confusion and bewilderment foreshadowed the imminent end of an era. On the 2nd of September of the 31st year of Guangxu 1905, an imperial edict was issued from the Forbidden City, sweeping across the entire empire like autumn wind scattering fallen leaves. This seemingly ordinary decree announced the end of a system that had lasted for over 1,300 years, starting from the Bingwu examination year. All provincial and metropolitan examinations shall cease entirely. The annual examinations in all provinces shall also cease immediately. These few dozen words tolled like evening drums and morning bells, sounding the death knell of the imperial examination system. On that autumn evening, as the sun set in the west and golden rays spread across the land, countless examination halls began their final silence. Those examination cells that had witnessed countless joys and sorrows, those examination grounds that had once echoed with the sound of reciting, were now shrouded in a desolate autumn atmosphere. The wheel of history rolled forward, and the imperial examination system, this ancient institution that had once carried the dreams of countless people, finally reached its end. The arrival of this moment was not sudden. As early as the mid-19th century, when Western ships and cannons blasted open China's doors, the traditional education system began to face unprecedented challenges. The rise of the self-strengthening movement, the establishment of new-style schools, and the promotion of overseas education were quietly changing China's educational landscape. And the imperial examination system, this ancient institution that had once been the only pathway for selecting talent, began to seem increasingly out of place. China in the late 19th and early 20th century was in an era of unprecedented transformation. The devastating defeat in the First Sino-Japanese War, the failure of the 100 Days Reform, the humiliation of the Boxer Rebellion, blow after blow plunged the entire nation into deep reflection. Traditional culture and institutions faced unprecedented questioning, and the imperial examination system, as an important component of traditional culture, naturally became a target of criticism. Those scholars who once sweated in the imperial examination halls began to re-examine the knowledge they had learned. The 4 books and 5 classics, the 8-legged essays, these classics once regarded as golden rules appeared so pale and powerless when facing Western science, technology, and political systems. When British steam engines roared across Chinese land, when French electric lights illuminated Shanghai's night sky, when German steel was transforming China's industrial landscape, those well-read Juran and Jinshi found themselves knowing nothing about this rapidly changing world. What was even more heartbreaking was that officials cultivated by the imperial examination system were often helpless when facing national crises. They were well versed in the books of sages and masters of poetry and prose, yet they didn't understand how to build railways, didn't know how to develop industry, and had no idea how to conduct diplomatic negotiations with foreign powers. This deficiency in knowledge structure proved especially fatal at the critical moment, when the nation faced life or death. Meanwhile, modern education was quietly emerging. As early as 1862, the Tongwen Guan in the capital had already been established, beginning to cultivate talents in foreign languages and science and technology. Subsequently, Westernization movement officials in various regions established new-style schools one after another, introducing Western science, technology, and educational methods. Although these schools were small in scale, they represented an entirely new educational philosophy and talent cultivation model. The most symbolic was the establishment of the Imperial University of Peking in 1898. This first modern university in China not only had a curriculum completely different from traditional imperial examination education, but more importantly, it represented a new set of educational values. Here, students no longer just memorized ancient classics by rote, but learned modern scientific knowledge, no longer just pursued elegant prose, but mastered practical skills, no longer just aimed to pass exams for official titles, but strived for the nation's prosperity and strength. The rise of overseas education was an even more direct blow to the traditional imperial examination system. When those young people returned from studying abroad with advanced knowledge and ideas, they formed a stark contrast with traditional degree holders. The former mastered modern science and technology, understood Western political systems, and possessed a broad international perspective. The latter, though well-versed in classical texts, were often conservative in thought, outdated in knowledge, and struggled to adapt to the demands of the times. This contrast led more and more people to question the value of the imperial examination system. Facing the surging tide of reform, the imperial examination system was making its final struggle. In the 27th year of Guangxu's reign, 1901, the court issued an edict to reform the examinations, abolishing the 8-legged essays, switching to policy essays and adding some practical subjects. This reform attempted to adapt to the needs of the times while maintaining tradition, but the results were far from ideal. Although the content of traditional examinations had been adjusted somewhat, the overall framework of the system hadn't fundamentally changed. Candidates still needed to spend enormous amounts of time and energy preparing for exams, and the content of these exams remained largely disconnected from the needs of real society. More importantly, the values represented by the imperial examination system, prioritizing literature over science and the ancient over the modern, were completely incompatible with the demands of the times. Meanwhile, new style schools were developing faster and faster. By 1905, there were already thousands of various new style schools nationwide, with hundreds of thousands of enrolled students. These schools were not only growing rapidly in number, but also constantly improving in quality. The students they produced were clearly superior to those from the traditional imperial examination system in terms of knowledge structure and capability. This contrast made the drawbacks of the imperial examination system even more apparent and raised the calls for its abolition ever louder. 1905 was a milestone year for the history of Chinese education. The Russo-Japanese War was fought on Chinese soil in the northeast, with two foreign powers battling on China's territory, while the Chinese government could only stand by as spectators. This humiliating reality once again reminded people that the traditional education system could no longer produce the talents the nation needed. A more direct driving force came from the strong appeals of the education and intellectual communities. Westernization officials like Zhang Zhidong and Yuan Shikai, reformists like Kang Yue and Liang Qikao, as well as numerous educators and scholars, all submitted memorials to the court demanding the abolition of the imperial examinations and the development of new-style education. Their reasoning was simple. The imperial examination system had become an obstacle to national progress and must be completely abolished to make room for new-style education. What ultimately led to this historic decision was the memorial request to immediately abolish the imperial examination and expand schools jointly submitted by Yuan Shikai, Zhang Zhidong, and others. In this memorial they analyzed in detail the drawbacks of the imperial examination system, argued for the necessity of abolishing it, and proposed specific plans for developing modern education. This memorial was approved by the court, ultimately leading to the decision to abolish the imperial examination. The provincial examination in the 31st year of Guangxu 1905 became the last imperial examination in Chinese history. When tens of thousands of candidates walked into examination halls across the country, they didn't know this would be the swan song of the imperial examination system. In those familiar examination cells, in those ancient examination grounds, history was quietly turning its final page. The atmosphere of this examination felt particularly heavy. Many candidates had already heard rumors about the abolition of the imperial examination, and their hearts were filled with complex emotions. Some came with a last-ditch mentality, hoping to seize the final opportunity before the system was abolished. Others seemed distracted, knowing that even if they passed, the title wouldn't mean much anymore. Still others simply gave up the examination altogether, and turned to studying at modern schools. When the examination ended and the results were announced, those newly successful candidates who made it onto the golden list had mixed feelings. Although they had achieved their long-held dream, they found that this dream had already lost its former glory. They became the last batch of beneficiaries of the imperial examination system, and at the same time, the final witnesses to this institution. The imperial edict of the 2nd of September, like autumn wind sweeping away fallen leaves, completely ended the history of the imperial examination system. When the news spread throughout the country, the entire society was shaken. In those ancient examination halls, administrators began packing up testing equipment and sealing examination cells. In those private schools, teachers began contemplating their futures. In those scholarly families, parents began replanning their children's education. The most agonized were those scholars preparing for the imperial examinations. Many of them had struggled for over a decade or even several decades for this, and suddenly all their efforts had turned to nothing. Those classics they had memorized, those essays they had painstakingly practiced, those dreams filled with infinite hope, all lost their meaning overnight. But history won't stop advancing because of individual suffering. Although the abolition of the imperial examination system brought pain to some, it paved the way for the modernization of education for the entire nation. From then on, China's education began moving toward diversification. School education gradually replaced imperial examinations, modern subjects gradually replaced traditional classics, and practical knowledge gradually replaced empty rhetoric. When we examine the imperial examination system from the heights of history, we cannot help but acknowledge its historical contributions. Throughout more than 1,300 years of history, the imperial examination system cultivated countless talents for China, maintained social stability, and promoted cultural inheritance. It broke the restrictions of family status, providing commoners' children with a path for advancement. It unified cultural standards, promoting ethnic integration. It selected large numbers of outstanding officials, maintaining national governance. But we also can't ignore its historical limitations. As times developed, the imperial examination system became increasingly rigid and conservative. It overemphasized literary techniques while neglecting practical knowledge. It relied too heavily on memorization and recitation while neglecting innovative thinking. It focused too much on personal cultivation while neglecting teamwork. These drawbacks might not have been so obvious in traditional society, but when facing the challenges of modernization, they became particularly prominent. More importantly, the educational philosophy and values represented by the imperial examination system had fundamental conflicts with the requirements of modern society. What modern society needs are talents with scientific spirit, innovative ability, and practical skills, not scholars who can only recite classics and write essays. This fundamental conflict determined that the imperial examination system was bound to be eliminated by history. Although the imperial examination system, as a selection system, has exited the historical stage, the cultural connotations it carried haven't completely disappeared. That respect for knowledge, emphasis on learning, and pursuit of fairness still deeply influence the way Chinese people think and behave. In modern educational systems, we can still see the shadow of the imperial examination system. Unified examination systems, standardized evaluation systems, and the principle of merit-based admission all have countless connections with the imperial examination system. Of course, modern educational systems have undergone fundamental changes in both content and form, but in certain basic concepts, they still inherit the traditions of the imperial examination system. More importantly, the value of those who excel in learning should become officials embodied by the imperial examination system still largely influences Chinese people's life choices. Although career choices in modern society have become more diversified, studying hard and passing exams for advancement remain the main path for most Chinese people to change their fate. This phenomenon shows that although the imperial examination system has disappeared, the cultural tradition it represents still has strong vitality. As night falls when we look back at this magnificent history, the imperial examination system has left us with many profound insights. First, no system is eternal and unchanging. It must constantly adjust and reform with the development of the times. The reason why the imperial examination system could last for over 1,000 years was precisely because it continuously improved and developed itself throughout the long river of history. But when it could no longer adapt to the demands of the times, being eliminated by history became inevitable. Second, the education system must adapt to the needs of social development. The imperial examination system played an important role in agricultural society, but it seemed inadequate in industrial and information societies. This tells us that education reform must keep pace with the times, constantly updating educational content and methods to cultivate the talents that society needs. Finally, any institutional change will bring pain, but this pain is a necessary price for historical progress. Although the abolition of the imperial examination system brought pain to some people, it paved the way for the modernization of the entire nation. This reminds us that when facing institutional changes, we should have a historical perspective and an overall view, and not let partial interests hinder overall progress. When the last page of history is turned, when the last bell's echo fades away, the story of the imperial examination system finally draws to a close. From its establishment in the Sui and Tang dynasties to its refinement in the Ming and Qing, from the Great Fire in the 7th year of Tianshun to its abolition in 1905, this system that lasted over 1,300 years witnessed the rise and fall of Chinese civilization and carried the joys and sorrows of countless scholars. In this long river of history, how many youthful years were spent in examination cells, how many life dreams were realized in examination halls, and how many hopes were shattered before the announcement boards. The joy of seeing one's name on the golden list, the pain of failing the exam, the perseverance through 10 years of hard study, the glory of overnight fame, all have become memories of history, symbols of culture. But history never truly ends and culture never completely disappears. In modern China's educational system, in contemporary Chinese values, we can still find the shadow of the imperial examination system, that reverence for knowledge, that pursuit of fairness, that persistence in striving. They still deeply influence our ways of thinking and patterns of behavior. Perhaps this is where the meaning of history lies. It is not merely a record of the past, but also a mirror of the present and a guide for the future. When we move forward on the path of modernization, when we struggle in the waves of globalization, that ancient wisdom and experience can still offer us inspiration and guidance. Let us, on this tranquil night, amidst the echoes of history, pay tribute to those ancients who fought for their dreams, and bid farewell to that system which carried countless hopes. May their spirit forever inspire us, may their stories forever move us, may their experiences forever enlighten us. This is the story of the imperial examination system, an eternal tale about dreams and reality, tradition and change, the individual and history. In the long river of history, it is but a fragment, yet this fragment is so rich, so profound, so worthy of being forever remembered.